So I've been working in enterprise IT for the whole time I've been in my career, which is over 20 years. And I started initially doing first line support and then worked my way back and doing change and release management before I made a switch into software delivery. So I've been both ops and I've been in the development team. And also as well in that evolution, sort of like right at the beginning, I was in more of a standard ITIL framework. I'm qualified in that. And then whilst I was at Nokia, I made a bit of a move into more of an agile space as I tried to get nearer and near the problems that I saw across the organization. And one of my things that drives me absolutely crazy is when people say those things don't work together, that they're somehow at conflict. Well, having done my own agile transformation and done this several times at client sites, subsequently now I work for ThoughtWorks, I'd like to offer the fact that actually we are all looking at the same thing. But at the same time, I can't help but remember the moment that someone said to me at Nokia, so we're just going to deploy directly from my laptop to live system, having just broken the live system for 12 hours the previous week. Wasn't a great feeling. So when we talk about tribes, I'm always minded of that great quote from Joe Cox. We are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us. But then we think about what divides us, and often that's organizational structures or processes and the way that the organization has actually sort of like set itself up to who cares about what, where's the pain and who feels it, who gets rewarded and for what. And I'm always minded whenever I talk to people, particularly in the ops space, where they assume that somehow, for example, the devs might game the testing system, or in fact that the ops team are there just to be the grown-ups in the room. But we're all guilty of it. We all try to use our own tribal language. And if you're familiar with the language of your tribe, these all make perfect sense. Everybody knows what a request for change is. Everybody knows what a CAB is, or a stand-up, or a retrospective, or other acronyms, helpfully like CI/CD, then XP. But actually, if you aren't in there and people are talking about those things, it's hard to understand what we mean by it. We get caught up in our own language and forget to explain not only what do they mean, but also why are we doing them? For what purpose? It's hard to see ourselves objectively. Most people don't. But actually, when you think back on it, if you're in the ops space, every question has got a story behind it. Nobody's deploying just for fun. Nobody plans to break systems. So I think the first thing that we need to think about is we need to assume positive intent. Even if when those things happen, they can be quite emotive. We're dealing with humans. And as someone who has been that person who got yelled at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning because somebody had deployed something on Friday night, gone home and hadn't noticed the effect, I am somewhat sympathetic to their cause. It's not actually a great sort of like way to start your week. But actually, we could use these things to our advantages. When I see a 3-page request for change form, I don't freak out. I go and find the person or persons that have written the form, and I try to understand what's driven that bizarre question about, have you tested this, or have you ensured that these people know that? Everybody has some variation of the story of the time when someone updated a field with 12 rows in the test system and it worked fine. And then when they deployed it to 12,000 rows in the live system, everything ground to a halt. And so now when you read the question about how much data have you tested this on, that question makes perfect sense. Also, We're not having meetings just to discuss things, just to get together. Although, you know, I'm an extrovert, I like that too. But actually we want to find the information out. So it's good to ask about those history and to reframe some of the questions. Instead of asking, what's the risk of doing something? Maybe ask, what would happen if we didn't deploy this? Also, to get not only a shared language of risk to understand things, but also shared ownership. It's everybody has got the same customer, or at least they should be. So actually, when we're talking about risk, we're talking about, on the ops side, reducing the impact to a live environment. We want to reduce risk through standard changes. We like that repeatability. We like knowing how things work. Release windows. We like to know when things might be like happening so that we can see when things are going wrong. Also, the other side, quiet periods. And it might vary from industry to industry. You know, it might be when the stock exchange is closed. And it's definitely not the best time to deploy something critical in the week before Christmas if you're a supermarket. And mostly we're asking for an audit trail, not because we want to go point the finger, but because when you've got an SLA to get back to a customer within 30 minutes, it's really helpful to know who just did something in live that we can maybe just ask a question, could that have been you? Also, from a deployment and a development point of view, we like frequent releases. We like to see how things are working. We like to get that feedback. We like to have things in pipelines so that we can make them easier and we can automate things. We retrospect because we want to improve. We also want to do iterative development. We don't like the Big Bang Theory. We like to actually, well, I like the TV show, but maybe not as an approach for releasing, but we like to be able to build on things. And again, we like to understand, why are we doing this? What's our motivation? And most importantly, what happens after we go live? Trust. Nothing sinks my heart more than job applications for DevOps engineers. It's not a job, it's a culture, and it's the idea of people sharing things. It's all one of those things when we have a different definition of customer. So one group of the organization thinks the business is their customer, and another part of the organization thinks the end users are our customers. And who owns that live system? Sort of like, if you've got some kind of wall you need to climb over, or somebody doesn't have access to it once it's gone live, how do you get that shared ownership? How do you build that trust? I was looking for a nice bit of clip art to describe trust. And I guess that sort of swinging on a trapeze is the best sort of thing. You know, it takes a moment of trust to leap into space, but it also takes a moment of confidence to be able to know you're going to catch something. And I like to talk more about handoffs, not handovers, like a parcel, not in a kind of pass the parcel kind of way, but more in a kind of like, here, let's share a box of chocolate kind of way. But I'm going to come back to a real life example because it is all about people. And I'm going to come back to the conversation after. You want to send it what to live from where? I'm quite ashamed to admit, fairly against the idea of agile development and continuous deployment. And so I put a set of standards in place. And the standards involved some heavy duty monitoring, which we already had in place. But mostly the thing I was exceptionally proud of is we had a deployment machine, and the deployment machine was set up facing the monitoring boards. And people would come there and they would deploy their code, especially from that machine. And therefore, if anything happened, you'd be able to see it instantly. You're probably expecting me to say that the first time that they did it, something went wrong. It didn't. nor the next time, or the next time, or in fact, for ages and ages and ages. Also, it didn't go completely without hitch. In fact, the only person to have broken live was my best mate, who'd moved from support to development several months earlier. And therefore, I had to abandon the idea that someone was going to try breaking something, because actually I knew that more than anybody else, he really understood what it was like when a client was going to yell at them for doing something wrong. I love this quote by my colleague Keith, who put this on Twitter a few months ago. I have to say, I don't necessarily agree with the whole sentiment. In fact, if you ever happen to listen to Keith and I over a coffee, pretty much we argue about this sort of thing all the time, about who owns what. But I love the sentiment that sort of says, you know, it's not about handing it over, it's about handoffs between each other, and so that people can fix different things. But let's talk about motivations. It's that often quoted thing. What you measure is how people behave. And it's true. Inadvertently, usually organisations create that organisation. If one half of the organisation is incentivised to not break live, and the other half is incentivised to build and deploy quickly, you're on a hiding for conflict. So we need to share the responsibility, and for the whole life cycle. On call for everybody, named people on deployments, a firm audit trail, a quiet period. The other thing that gets my goat more than anything else is the term hero engineers or 10x developers. Oh, that grates my cheese so much. If you have those people in your organization, something is horribly wrong. If you are rewarding people for saving the day, they don't care about never having days to save. If you have someone who's banging out loads of code and that's what you're valuing, they're not going to care about the quality of it. It's about sharing things and about sharing that responsibility. And let's talk a little bit about value. Considering why we're doing stuff. Often we've got time-driven deadlines, time-driven milestones, leading us to deadlines and things that people feel pressured to achieve. Also, why are we doing this? What actual problem are we solving? Are we solving the right problem in the right way? And how do we know that we've been successful? Is it just money? Maybe it's time. Maybe it's customer happiness. And also as well, thinking about what might improve a system, what would give us value. I was talking to somebody the other day about something that was going wrong in a system. And they were like, well, it doesn't really matter. Sort of like we spend like, oh, it's like 2 minutes to fix that every sort of like, you know, day. What, just you? I said. No, everybody does it. So 12 devs spend 2 minutes every day. Yeah. It's nearly half an hour. You know, it's like nearly 2 hours a month and the week. And actually that's coming on for about 2.5 weeks a year. That's a lot of coding. That's a sprint worth of stuff you could be doing and not just rebooting that system for 2 minutes. Oh, they said. The other thing when we're talking about risk, we want to talk about small and often. Why are we wanting to do that? It reduces the regular releases reduce risk. They ensure that it's easier to identify what the problem is. It also helps us to be able to roll back or maybe roll forward. And it's also counterintuitive. Like every time I read the DORA metrics, if you haven't read the State of DevOps reports or the fabulous book, Accelerate, you should definitely read that, even if you're not those kind of people. Maybe stay away from the stats at the back. I've never finished the book, but the first bit's amazing. But it's counterintuitive. More frequent releases actually result in more safety. We often want to resolve this risk issue by testing more, but no test is foolproof. Something will always get wrong. I mean, I have to say, I mostly try and test things through my mum, who, if there's a way to click on something the wrong way or to press a button in the wrong way, usually does it. So she's my #1 user tester. But at the same time, my mum is not like some particularly weird person. She's, especially if you're doing something for the public sector, she represents about 20% of the population that might be using your product. It's not so daft after all.
5-minute warning, Claire.
Thank you. Also, knowing your landscape. I'm a big believer in monitoring and observability, not just for looking for things that have broken, but actually to understand what I like to call the heartbeat of your organization. I said that I worked for a music streaming service. And so, for example, when we were talking about that, I might say to you, well, we'll do it at the least busy time. When do most people download music? You're right, it's the evening, except we were a global organization. So it's evening everywhere. So, okay, well, evening in the quietest place somewhere else. Okay, well, how do we know what the quietest place is? We could do that. Also, not thinking about things, so offline is not your only measure of success, of things being wrong. For example, if you're a quote bearing system, your insurance, for example, if no one can save their quote or send an email out with it at the end of it, is your system fundamentally up, even if you can ping it and get a DNS response? Also, again, I'm going to ask the question, what happens if we don't do this? But also the opposite. What would happen if I removed every obstruction in your way and you could do whatever you wanted? What's stopping you? What would be the outcome of that? Also, these are the kind of things as well. Ops should be feeding into product development. It's not all about the funky cool stuff. You know, I always love when I read a change log on anything I've downloaded to read. Bug fixes for unexpected errors. Great, I want to run into those. And again, timing is everything. Knowing when the best time to do it and how to do it is perfect. Would I want to go to the corner shop in my flip-flops? Sure. In November? Maybe not. Do I want to climb the Matterhorn in them? Definitely not. So, what do I want you to take away from this talk? Risk is the language that we share. And when we're talking about risks, we can talk about 3 main areas where we can see them. One is around how we decide what we should do, when we should do it, and how we should do it. How are we measuring the risk of doing stuff? Also, keeping it small, moving forward, releasing value more often, getting easy backouts. Lastly, monitoring and observability, so we understand when we would be taking bigger risk and not to be scared of doing that